Welcome to our tutorial about geometric constraints. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to prevent our geometry from moving. We use two types of constraints to do this: geometric constraints and dimensional constraints. In this lesson, I'm going to be covering geometric constraints. Let's begin by creating a shape. Activate the line command. And I'll create a number of lines. Right-click and enter to close the tool. Each of these lines is a separate entity that can be freely moved in model space. What I'm going to do now is convert these lines into a square using geometric constraints. I've gone to the Parametric tab, and first I'm going to apply a Coincident Constraint. Here's the Coincident Constraint symbol next to the cursor. First, I select a point. When I mouse over the line, the endpoints and the center point are highlighted. Here's one endpoint, there's the center point, here's the other endpoint. Let me select this endpoint and the endpoint of this line. And here is our coincident constraint between the endpoint of this line and this other line. That means they share coordinates at that point. When I mouse over the line, the coincident constraint symbol appears. It means the constraint was applied to these entities. Now watch what happens when I try to drag the line. The second line will follow. Let's apply another coincident constraint. I make my selection of 2 points here and here. Press the space bar to reactivate the command. Let's apply the constraint between these two endpoints. We'll need to apply a few more coincident constraints. This point, and I'll use the midpoint of this line. Let's undo. Since we're trying to create a square, I'm going to place a coincident constraint between these 2 points. Now we've got a closed shape, but it's still not a square. However, when I move one line, the rest of the entities now follow. Okay, let's escape to deselect everything. And now I'm going to apply horizontal and vertical constraints. There's the vertical constraint symbol. Let's select this line. It's now a vertical line. Let's apply a horizontal constraint now. I can either select a line as I did previously, or, as you saw, right-click and select 2 points. Then I make my selection of points in the graphic area. At this time, we can make this line vertical, or we can apply a perpendicular constraint between these 2 lines, since this line already has a horizontal constraint. Let's try the second option. We'll apply a perpendicular constraint. Select this line and this line. Now, time to time, you will end up with unexpected results, as you see here. The fastest way out is to undo. At this point, we've basically got 3 different options. We can apply different geometric relations. We can apply the same relation to different entities. Or I can simply adjust my geometry a little bit and then reapply the relation. What I'm going to do is the third option. I will drag my geometry a little bit to reposition. That way AutoCAD can better calculate the relation. Now I'll reapply the perpendicular relation. Select my 2 lines, and this time it works out. When you're applying constraints and you're not sure what else you need to fix your model, the best thing to do is drag around your entities. This lets you easily see what is not fixed in space. You can see which part of the geometry still moves. Let's undo to restore to the previous shape. Now let's make this line horizontal. The most obvious solution would be to apply a horizontal constraint, or a perpendicular constraint between these 2 lines. We could also make these 2 lines parallel or equal. Let's use the equal relation. Select my 2 lines. In order to end up with a full square, let's apply one more equal constraint between these 2 lines. Now, if I select my geometry, I'm still able to move the model in space. To restrict the geometry from any movement, we can apply a fixed constraint to one point. Let's choose this corner. So now I'm not able to move the geometry, but I can resize the vertices that aren't fixed in space. Let's apply one more fixed constraint at this point. And now when I grab and drag my geometry, I'm not able to move it at all. Okay, let's unselect everything. And when I mouse over the geometry, the constraints belonging to each entity become highlighted. Same thing when I mouse over the constraint. The geometry to which the constraint applies becomes highlighted. We do have the option to hide and show constraints. We can also hide all constraints or hide and show selected constraints. Let me select an entity, right-click and select Show. Now the constraints for this line are displayed. Okay, let's try out another example now. This time I'm going to use a polyline to create a shape. Let's right-click and switch to the Arc tool. And right-click and switch back to the Line tool. Let's right-click and close our entity. At this point, I haven't applied any constraints, so obviously this geometry can be freely moved in model space. Let's go to the Parametric tab and apply some constraints now. First, let's apply some vertical and horizontal constraints. I want a tangent relation between this line and the arc. Let's select the line, and then the arc, and the tangency symbol now appears here. The red cross indicates the point of tangency. Let's apply one more tangent relation. I'll select the arc and this line. Now let's apply a parallel relation between this line and this line. Since the line on the left already had a vertical relation applied to it, this one stays stationary and this one moves. Let's apply one more parallel relation between this line and this line. If you're not sure which other constraints you need, just grab a point and drag it around a bit. Undo to restore the geometry to its original shape. Let's apply a perpendicular constraint between this line and this line. Another perpendicular constraint here, this line and this line. Okay, now our geometry is taking shape. However, I'm still able to move and resize it. Let's undo. I'm going to apply a fixed constraint to this point and this point. So I've got two vertices now fixed in space. However, I can still grab and drag this point here and resize the geometry. Let's undo, and let's apply two more fixed constraints, one to this point and another to this point. Now, when I try to move or resize my geometry, I can't do it at all, as you see from my attempts here to drag the geometry around model space. Let's unselect everything. And let's see what happens when I apply a fillet to this corner. As you remember earlier, we applied a fixed constraint to this point. That's indicated by the red X. Let's go to the Home tab, activate the Fillet command, right-click and select Radius. Value will be 1 unit, and press Enter. I'll select this line, and watch what happens to the constraint when I select the second line. AutoCAD has automatically deleted our fixed constraint. As you probably suspect, some of our geometry gets unconstrained. Let's undo and see what happens when I apply a fixed constraint to each end of the arc. Now when I grab the arc, I'm still able to move it, so we need one more constraint. That would be either fix or tangent. Let's try the tangent constraint. Now our geometry is fully constrained. We're not able to move it, nor are we able to resize it. Let's see what happens if we apply some more constraints. I'll select the tangency constraint and apply it here. AutoCAD lets us know this constraint can't be applied here since it'll over-constrain the geometry. Over-constrained geometry basically means you've got too many constraints. AutoCAD won't know which to use when calculating your model. Let's see how the concentric constraint works now. I'm just going to draw a circle here and a second. Now let's create a 3-point arc and return to the Parametric tab. The concentric constraint makes circles, arcs, and ellipses share a center point. With the tool activated, let's select the objects to which we'll apply the constraint, and now the circle and arc share a center point. Again with the two circles. Here is the concentric symbol. Here as well. Let me grab and drag one of the circles. As you notice, the second circle and the arc also moved. Lastly here, let's look at the Symmetry Constraint. Go to the Home tab, and let's activate the Line tool, create a line, couple circles now, and back to the Parametric tab. Let's activate the Symmetry Constraint. Select our objects, to which we'll apply symmetry, the circle, and the second circle. Now choose the Symmetry line. Now we've got two circles symmetrical against this line. Adjust one circle, and the second will modify to maintain symmetry against the line. This concludes our first lesson about using constraints.